YouTube? Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video with Mr. Terry as I continue my search for historical knowledge found here on YouTube. Alright, today's video comes from our awesome patrons over at Patreon, and for last week's poll, they voted on this video, which is Viking Warfare, Myths versus Realities by Military History Visualized. So it looks like here they're going to debunk, things that people think about Vikings, which I think is really interesting because honestly, the more I learn about Vikings, the more I learn that a lot of the stereotypes are not true. So I think this is one of those, it seems like a lot of the cultures that are out there that are fairly popular, probably the one that could be the most prone to the wrong information in a way. So let's see if we can figure it out as far as, hey, what did we know that's actually true and what is myth? Right? Yeah, we all know the horns out of the helmet's not a thing, and they're going to do that, but what else out there? So we'll go ahead and get this started in just a second. All right, original video link is down below if you want to see it in its entirety that way, and please click it to just give support, give a view, like, subscribe over to Military History Visualized, a channel that I'm newly discovering and looks to be really good. So anyway, if you'd like to get involved in the polls, there's a link down to the Patreon down below. You can join that and get involved, and it's another way to support the channel and have a little more say in what gets on the channel here. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Viking hats on. Wait, no.
Vikings are often portrayed as fierce warrior savages that pillaged and plundered through Europe, that were mostly undefeated.
All right, let's look at his source. Love it. The first time I've seen someone actually put a source in their video, right? For that. This video is based on the article Raiding and Warfare by Gareth Williams. Okay. In Brink, Stefan, the Viking World. See description. Cool. So it looks like if you want to know more, check that source out. Looks like it's in the description of the original video.
Well, according to recent research, most of these views are wrong, or not really distinctive for the Vikings. So basically, a lot of information is wrong on what seems to be common knowledge about the Vikings. And I'm not talking about superficial stuff like horned helmets here.
Knew that was coming, right? That's so funny. Anytime I do a Viking related video, I've done I covered a few people, that's like the first thing. And probably for the most people, the only thing. So it's a very easy criticism to make you look very smart.
First off, Vikings are not an ethnicity. Being a Viking is, or better was, an
it's a way of life.
Occupation, like being a heavy metal musician or a university professor. The term is derived from the Old Norse word Viking, which means basically raider or pirate. Yet the term is also used more openly even among scholars. To quote the historian Gareth Williams, although trading, crafts, seafaring and settlement and many other aspects of Viking society may be equally important, it is the raiding which gives us the concept of a Viking age.
Okay, so they're saying like they wouldn't even been called Vikings if they weren't known for raiding villages. They would just be whatever. It's not an ethnic group. So that's already something that's kind of new to me. I know there's different ethnicities, but I didn't know, thinking of like a Venn diagram, where do Vikings and the different ethnicities and kingdoms, where does that intersect, if they do at all?
So let's take a look at the common myths. First off, these myths and portrayals were influenced by various factors. Since the Vikings plundered monasteries and those were the leading centers of literacy in the Middle Ages, history in this case was written mostly by the losers. In contrast, the Viking culture was mostly
hold on, I want to go back to that, because that's an important point.
And those were the leading centers of literacy in the Middle Ages, history in this case was written mostly by the losers.
That's interesting. He's saying the history of the Vikings is actually written by the losers because they didn't participate in writing activities much. That kind of goes back almost to that region earlier when you talk about like Germanic kingdoms, the ones that invaded Rome. Going back even further, that they didn't have that tradition. So yeah, much of what you learn is from the losing. But the interesting thing about that is that usually when we think of history, the writing of history, it's written by the victors, right? And they can often do that and then control the narrative, right? And that's where you also get a lot of bias from that. So that's an interesting thing, kind of an exception to how we've learned a lot about history.
In contrast, the Viking culture was mostly a non-literate culture. They had an alphabet, but only produced a very limited amount of written documents. and those that survived were usually created after Christianity had already a major influence on their culture. As if those monks were not bad enough, there were the usual misinterpretations and also glorifications later. And as we all know, if you cross a husky with a rat often enough, you get a chihuahua. Anyway, let's combine some common views and myths about the Vikings into one statement. Vikings were fierce, undefeated and brutal warriors that lusted for battle, who pillaged and plundered through the peaceful Christian coastal areas of Western Europe like a gang of hoodlums and committed unspeakable atrocities.
But
now, let's take some time to examine various parts of this little sentence. Pillaged and plundered through the peaceful Christian coastal areas of Western Europe. Did the Vikings pillage and plundered through coastal areas? Yes, they did. And since they were overachievers, they did even more. They also attacked mostly landlocked targets like Paris by using their superior ships that had a great deal of carrying capacity and could also travel in relatively shallow water. Yet these areas...
Yeah, the Viking longships, aren't they actually quite... they're not very deep. They're right above the waterline, right? Which I guess makes sense that you can do it in more shallow waters. When you think of the caravels and stuff that are developed later on by like the Portuguese, the big explorer ships you think of with the Age of Exploration, those are bigger ships that are much deeper, so they can't go on rivers where these can. So that does definitely make sense.
Areas were definitely not peaceful. There was a regular warfare between the many kingdoms throughout that era. Nor were the Vikings the only ones that attacked Christian monasteries or churches. Attacks from Christians weren't unknown at that time. This also brings us to the next part, the brutality and atrocities. Brutal warriors that lusted for battle and committed unspeakable atrocities. One brutality cited is the so-called blood eagle, which allegedly was the cutting up of ribs and pulling out the lungs of the victim.
I hadn't heard of that before. Blood eagle. Sounds like a big deal.
But there are very few accounts of it, and those do not appear in contemporary sources. Hence many scholars argue that it was a literary invention, misinterpretation or exaggeration. But this doesn't mean that the Vikings were a bunch of nice guys that politely knocked on your door and asked if they can talk to you about the savior of mankind for the thunder god. But historical behavior needs always to be taken into context. Thus, brutality in the Middle Ages can't be measured by modern standards. But what we know, what was common at that era, there's little indication that the Vikings were much more brutal than the Christians at that time.
I mean, if you're one that's getting raided, obviously the accounts are going to make it look very bad. You can't think there's an account of someone getting raided and then the people getting raided wrote, they were just so nice. They were such polite raiders, right? So you wonder, obviously the best type of history for an historian to do is try to get multiple perspectives, right? You get a Viking side, you get anyone, I guess, that they're raiding, and then hopefully a third party. And sometimes a lot of times they'll say the truth is somewhere in the middle. So you can see where there's going to be already with what they set up is, since it's being written by, the whole history is being written by the raided, it's going to be biased in that direction. How could it not?
Which brings us to the next part, like a gang of hoodlums. Although Vikings are usually portrayed as fierce warriors, they are also often portrayed more like a gang than an organized war party or military force. Yet there are many indications that they were well organized. They had a strategy which had a strong focus on mobility, logistics and recon that allowed them to attack targets by surprise and leave before the enemy could react. Furthermore, it is noted that they avoided battle unless they were confident to win. There's a technical term for this. It is called smart.
Let's go through that whole line of reasoning again.
They avoided battle unless they were confident to win. There's a technical term for this. It is called smart.
They were smart. That's what it seemed like they're raiding, because they only raid when they win, or they're only going to do this stuff when they know they're going to win.
Mobility was a crucial part of Viking raiding campaigns. They achieved this by using their ships, but also horses. These horses were mainly used for transport and usually not during combat.
So that'd be
The
different than
Vikings-
a European knight who are mounted warriors, right? I mean, it makes sense. They do a lot with hand to hand combat, but I'm guessing they also would bring these horses on their ships as well, though.
used mounted infantry and not cavalry. It is known that the Vikings sometimes attacked from land and sea together. For instance, at Exeter in 876. On the logistical side, the Vikings were quite sophisticated as well. The original raids were small and seasonal, but later on they performed large-scale raids and even performed them during winter. Considering that land wars by major kingdoms in that era were usually not conducted during winter, this should give you an indication on how well the Vikings were able to manage their supplies. They achieved this feat by taking over monasteries, towns and other places early in winter. Thus these places were already filled with supplies. Additionally, for the invaded kingdom it was difficult to raise and supply an army during that time of the year, which made counterattacks very unlikely. William's view on this is particularly interesting. When even major kingdoms struggled to maintain permanent field armies, the fact that the Vikings managed to campaign for years on end, often in hostile territory, is perhaps a more impressive achievement than any success they may have enjoyed on the battlefield.
That makes sense. Or just the Vikings have such a long history, so how could they? Yeah, do campaigns for years. It's just like what that makes it sound like is warfare is it's part of their culture. It's part of day-to-day life. Is hey, life is being on long campaigns. You're gone years at a time or whatever, and where you are is where your home is, right? It's almost nomadic, semi-nomadic in a way. Because I know they're herders and stuff like that, not necessarily as much of the large-scale agriculture you're going to find, which again works very well in those climates that they're from. But yeah, it almost does seem like almost semi-nomadic in a way.
Which means that any portrayal of the Vikings as a disorganized force that acted without thought or careful planning is even less valid as my claim to the Crown of Prussia. Which brings us to the final part
Wait,
of this
he was the king of Prussia? Cool.
statement. Vikings were fierce, undefeated and brutal warriors that lusted for battle. It is without question that the Vikings were formidable foes, especially since we know that they were smart and well organized, which is a crucial element for conducting effective military operations. Nevertheless, they also suffered notable defeats, besides the notable victories, and thus were far from undefeated.
England?
To conclude, let's revise what is left of our original myth sentence. Vikings were fierce warriors that pillaged and plundered through coastal areas of Western
All the
Europe.
cool stuff's gone.
And
All the cool stuff's gone, isn't it? Does that mean they're lame?
the reality was probably a bit closer to the following statement. Vikings were fierce and organized warriors that attacked selected targets in coastal areas and near large rivers due to superior strategic mobility. Their grasp of logistics
Boring.
allowed them to perform raids even during winter, which was very uncommon at that time,
Yeah.
unlike the raids itself, and they committed violence.
I'm just kidding. No, it's pretty amazing again what they were able to do, and yeah, maybe it's not what you thought of, but let's not take that away for that they were such an impactful civilization, whatever you want to call it, or group of people over centuries and centuries though.
Which were common occurrences in that time period, even among Christian kingdoms. So since we tackled the
Everybody's
myths,
raiding.
one question remained.
Everybody's raiding. The reason that they get talked about is they're the ones the ones doing the raiding. If you're doing the raiding yourself, you're not going to necessarily write about it. So the Christian kingdoms, when they go out and raid, are they going to go write about it, about how brutal and all this it is? No. So it shows you actually who were the more successful people. It's the Vikings.
How could the Vikings be stopped from raiding? As mentioned before, Viking raids relied heavily on mobility and supplies. Thus denying them both was a viable defensive measure. This was achieved by building fortified bridges that denied them access to the various rivers that were vital for their raids. Additionally, fortified towns on the coast allowed the defenders to hold out longer and also serve as a supply base for defending armies. And finally, it should be noted that Viking battle techniques and weapons were actually quite similar to that of their foes. The most
Wait, I didn't
distinctive
hear that.
and weapons were actually quite similar to that of their foes. The most distinctive feature of the
Foes.
Vikings was the emphasis of ships, strategic mobility, and logistics.
So yeah, it's not unlike anything else. It's not, way different. They're just really good at it.
Allowed them to outmaneuver the enemies before they could properly react. Thus, the main difference between Viking warfare and that of their foes was on a strategic, not tactical level. And we all know it is more comforting for the ego to state that one was overwhelmed by brutality rather than to admit that one was outsmarted by so-called savages.
The lifestyle of people that can't necessarily do as much of the large scale agriculture, let's say, of other civilizations. So make it the Vikings to the Europeans, or someone like the Mongols to the Chinese, right? Those societies, warfare is a way of life in a way because it is survival. If they are unable to get the products that they need, right? Being a place that maybe doesn't have as blessed of agriculture or something like that, then you find yourself very vulnerable to famines, weather conditions, all that kind of stuff. Okay. And may need to go take it, right, if necessary, for the continued survival of your culture. And if you're unable to be successful militarily, you're not going to make it. Your civilization's not going to make it. It's going to fall victim to outside influences, right? So it's almost like evolutionary in a way, where they have survived this, they've adapted to their surroundings, and they're the ones most fit to survive in it. And part of that, of course, is being able to take what you need, okay, in any way that you need to.
Now, if you're interested in Vikings, I have two recommendations for you. First, the book Viking World from 2011, with more than 700 pages. It is full of scholarly articles about everything concerning the Vikings.
Sweet.
I only read a few articles, but those were excellent and full of information and served me well for this video.
You all writing this down for your next Viking report you need to do in school?
And second, an album trilogy from the German heavy metal band Rebellion, which contains some of my favorite songs, most notably Ruling the Waves and God of Thunder. As always, you can find all the links in the description. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share and subscribe. And see you next time.
Nice. Vikings! All right. All right, guys. Okay, cool video. Good to see a lot of those myths dispelled. Again, it seems like the truth with someone like the Vikings lies somewhere in the middle, right? Can't throw out everything. We can't accept everything in here. So, as is history. If something's too good to be true in a way in history, it probably is. So, maybe that's the big lesson we can find out about that. Nevertheless, I guess we'll find out more when we get to all play Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and looking forward to that. If you saw that depending on what time you're watching this, that game just got announced. Actually, a reaction video to the trailer, the world premiere trailer. So I don't know. It kind of seems like it's Viking time. Honestly, it's like Vikings are kind of a real. I just noticed it it's a big topic right now. Just a lot long ago, there was a Viking exhibit at a museum near here that I went to, which was so cool, and being able to see a lot of artifacts, kind of like the time for the Vikings. So maybe that's pretty cool to check out. And as a teacher, I want to learn as much factual information and do what this video does, which is try to bring it all into perspective and bring it into the realm of possibility, I guess, while keeping it interesting, of course. All right, okay. Awesome. Good stuff. All right. Thank you, patrons, for being a part of this community in the way that you guys do. And thanks for voting on the video. Make sure, patrons, if you have it. By the time this uploads, should have a new poll up. And if you want to get involved, go down and use the link down in the description, and you can join Patreon as well. Okay. With that, thank you for being here. Thanks for subbing. Thanks for liking the video. Thanks for enabling notifications, and come hang out in our live events, our live quizzes, live premieres, live game streams, all that kind of stuff. A lot of interactive stuff in our community, and our very active, fun Discord server. All that links to all that stuff is down below. And with that, we'll go ahead and end it here, and see you next time. Bye.